Hello everybody, welcome to the shop. Today I got a special little project. Mike DeLawter over at Lost River Woodshop. You've heard me talk about Mike before. He's stabilized some blanks for me. You know, we've traded back and forth. He's a really good buddy of mine. He's actually a member of my Turner's Club, so I see him almost once a month. He had a contest on his website, and he took some cottonwood and he stabilized it, and you can see it's kind of got a little bit of a blue tint to it. And then he mixed up some red and white Alumilite, and he made a blank out of it. And actually, he made several blanks. And the deal was, you comment on the video and put the name of a turner who you would like to do a pin swap with. Now, I've been very busy lately. You guys all know that. So I commented that, you know, two reasons why I didn't want to participate. One was it would be almost impossible for me to pick a single turner that I wanted to do a pin swap with because there are so many, and I didn't want to leave anybody out. And the second reason why is I just really did not have the time to do a pin. However, I did put a caveat in there. There were already a couple of people that had chose me as a turner they would like to do a pin swap with, and not wanting to disappoint anyone, I let them know that if you chose me and if you won, I would find the time and I would do that pin swap with you. And that happened. John Parker commented on that video that he would love to do a pin swap with me, and John's name got pulled from the hat. So John and I are now doing a pin swap. This is the blank that I'm going to turn into a pin for John, and John has a blank that he will turn into a pin for me. Now, if I understand correctly, John does not have his lathe yet. He is new, wanting to get into turning, so it may be a while before I get a pin back, but quite honestly, I'm okay with that. I want to go ahead and live up to my end of the bargain. I'm going to get this made, I'm going to get it shipped out, and then later on, when John gets all his everything in order and gets his lathe and turns a pin and returns it to me, I will do an update to this video and show you the pin that John made for me. I'm preparing to drill my blank. Now, a little trick that I use is occasionally when you drill a blank that's made from a resin, what'll happen is the blank will split out at the bottom when the drill bit pokes through. So what I like to do is I'll take my tube and I'll lay it against my blank and get my mark so I know my distance. I'll go ahead and drop the blank into my pin vise. I'll bring it up to my drill press, and you can see the line. I hope you can see the line right there. I go ahead and raise the table to where the bit is just poking through the end of that mark. I'll take a piece of tape and I'll slap it right around the bit. Now what I can do is lower my table, and as I drill through this blank, when I hit the tape against the top of the blank, I know I've drilled a hole just slightly past my tube mark. I won't have any breakout. I can take this to my bandsaw, cut it right off on that line, and I've got a beautiful entry and exit hole so that I can glue my tube into the blank. I drilled the hole, and one thing I want to make mention of is if you'll notice this blank, it has kind of a sunken in area here. It's relatively level on the back, but where the piece of wood is, it kind of was concave. So when I drilled my hole, I moved to the back of the blank in an effort to not have such a thin area here, and it looks like I'm going to have a really nice amount of material to work with on all sides of the blank. So let me get the tube drilled in, and the next time you see this, it'll be cut, tubed, and on the lathe. I know that I mentioned the next time you saw this blank, it would be on the lathe, but I had something I wanted to show you. Here's the entry hole where I drilled into the blank, and there's the mark I made for my tube, and look at that. There's where the tip of the bit, and you can kind of see an outline where it had just started cutting. So the method that I used was perfect. That's not going to be an issue because if you take a look at the tube and you drop it in the blank, looky there. We got plenty of room. I'll be able to glue that in, no problem. And when we clean up the end of the blank on the sander, it'll take it right down to the tube, and this will be ready for turning. This really is a nice looking blank. Take a look at that. It's got some beautiful reds and whites in there. get around to the wood, and it's got that little blue dye in it. It's going to look gorgeous when it's turned. I could hear the blank and feel some chips coming off, and I thought I was having some chip out. If you look here though, that's still shiny, so this isn't an issue. But you come around to this side and take a look at that. I don't think that's going to be an issue though, because the cottonwood, this little old piece of material is maybe an 1/8 inch thick, and then there's cottonwood down to the bushings on both sides, so that's going to turn away. I'm not worried about that. I really, shucks, I'll be honest with you, when this is done, I think it's primarily going to be cottonwood. I don't see a lot of the red material down by the bushings. But you know what? I think it's still going to look pretty cool, and I'll take that, because just look at the grain in that cottonwood. So let's go ahead. I'm going to run my tool across the grinder, put a nice little edge on it. We're going to come back and see if we can't finish turning this blank. Take a look at that. That's a gorgeous blank. And I tell you what, you see how the color kind of shines? That's called chatoyance. Chatoyance is kind of like, you look at a cat's eye, and a cat's eye kind of has that reflectance to it. This is only going to get more reflective and more beautiful as I sand it and polish it. So what I'm going to shut the camera off. I'm going to run through my sandpaper from 120 to 600 grit, and then I'll come back and we'll put a CA finish on this and polish it up with the micro mesh, and this is going to be one gorgeous blank. A while back I added a reverse feature to my lathe, and I had a lot of people comment, and their comment was, well, why do you even need that? It seems sort of useless. But it's really not, and I'm going to tell you why. As you're cutting, some fibers you cut, and your tool, if it's not super sharp, it's going to lay some fibers down. So those fibers are going to lay down this direction. Your lathe is turning like this. If I sand in that direction, I'm just sanding with those fibers. If I reverse the lathe, my sandpaper is going to lift those fibers as it cleans and removes them. I can then reverse between each descending grit and continually lift and clean those fibers up. It's kind of like when you shave, they talk about lifting the beard hair so that you can get a nice close shave. It's the same principle. So I'm going to start out sanding in reverse with my 120 grit, and then I'm going to flip between each grit and sand, and I'm going to have a nice smooth finish. You're going to get a much smoother and a much better finish by reversing your blank between grits. I sand it down to 600, and between grits I would sand back and forth just to make sure I got any spiral sandpaper marks off the blank. We'll go ahead and wipe it down with a little denatured alcohol to make sure it's good and clean. And you can kind of get an idea of what this blank's going to look like when I get a finish on it. I'm going to let it set and dry for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to put some CA on it. I put my non-stick bushings on the lathe, and I went ahead and put them between centers. They're not really designed to be used that way, but they will work. And since I grabbed the blank with my fingers to put it between these non-stick bushings, I want to wipe it off one more time to make sure there's no oil from my hands on there. Give this a few minutes to dry, and we'll get that CA finish applied. I've given my blank plenty of time to dry, and before I start finishing it, I want to talk about a couple of things. One of the most common questions I get asked is, when I put my CA finish on the blank, I now have this sort of a foggy or hazy finish, and what causes that is a couple of things. Number one, if your piece of wood is not sufficiently dry, when CA cures, it builds heat, and that heat will cause, it's a lot of heat, it'll actually burn you if you get it on your skin, and that heat will cause moisture in the blank to evaporate. The outer surface or the outer shell of the CA will cure first, and then that moisture gets trapped within the CA, and you get a nice foggy appearance to your blank. The other issue is, I've seen people like this blank here was sufficiently dry. However, if I would have cleaned it with the denatured alcohol and not let it sit for a short period of time, went straight to CA, I could have had some fog because that denatured alcohol had not finished drying on the surface of that blank. Activator is another issue. If you want to use activator, that's fine, but I strongly recommend as you apply your coats of thin CA really only takes 15-20 seconds to dry. Let it dry naturally and build a surface on the blank. and then when you put your medium on, that's when you want to use your activator. I try to avoid activator until the final coat, and I only do that because I'm going to start handling the blank to assemble the pin, so I make sure the outer shell is solid before I touch it. I'm going to start out applying some thin CA, and what I've done is I've turned my lathe down as slow as it will go. Just going to put a coat of thin CA on there, smooth it out a little bit, and I'm going to let it dry naturally. Look at that. That blank is going to be incredible. Just wait till it's polished. I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera off. You can see some dry areas. See the dull area starting to form? Those dull areas let you know that that CA glue is soaking into the wood. That's why I'm going to put about 5 coats. I want to continue to put CA on until I don't see any dull areas. It should have a nice little shine from the thin CA. Then I will come back and start applying the medium. And what the medium does is build a little thickness so that I can polish the blank and not have to worry about polishing away the CA finish. I've got a couple of coats applied. I'm getting ready to apply a 3rd coat. And I wanted to show you guys something. An advantage to these conical shaped bushings is as I'm putting my CA on, I just wipe right off the sides of the blanks and take the CA right onto the bushings. If you do that with a standard metal bushing, unless you put a little wax on that bushing, you're going to glue your blank to the bushing. These little HDPE bushings, they will basically pop right off the blank, so it's not an issue. But by going off the blank, what you do is you avoid putting a little lip on either end of your blank. You don't want that because then you don't have a nice fit against your pin components. I finished applying my thin CA, and you can see down here I've got several drops of CA that I spilled on the ways of the lathe. Don't wipe those off. Leave them there. And the reason why is once they dry, you can take a razor blade, run it right down that way, it'll peel them right off. If you wipe them off, what happens is you get like a buildup on the ways of your lathe, and it will make it a little more difficult for the banjo to slide back and forth. My lathe, obviously, you can tell, needs a bit of cleaning. I've got some water spots and different things, and that's coming soon. But that's just a quick little tip. Leave those on there, let them dry, take them off with a razor blade. I've applied 5 coats of thin CA, and I don't see any dry marks, so I'm going to go ahead and put some medium on a paper towel, and I just wipe it, and notice I'm wiping right off the bushing on both ends, making it nice and even. If you take a look at it, you can kind of see, notice how it's it doesn't look super smooth yet. That's okay. What we're doing, that's the grain. The thin CA just seals the blank. The medium, we're going to put 3, 4, maybe even 5 coats on there until we don't see as much of that grain. And that's when we'll come back with our micro mesh pads, clean that up, level it out, and you're going to get a very brilliant finish. If you have those little marks in there between your grain, or showing your grain, you're just not going to get that beautiful shine that you're looking for. So let's go ahead. We're going to try 2 more coats, take a look at it, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like. I'll show you guys. I'm not going to show you each coat as it goes on, but I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished. I put 4 coats of medium CA on this blank. And if you take a look along, see that reflection on the top of the blank? If you kind of follow that, it's staying pretty solid. There's a few tiny divots, but they should sand out when I sand with the micro mesh pads. Not worried about that. I have taken about a half an hour to get to this point, letting the glue dry about almost 10 minutes between applications. This last application has been drying for a couple of minutes. It's my final application, and I'm going to show you what happens when you put a little bit of activator on there. Take a look how smooth that line is. Let's turn our lathe on. A couple of spritzes about 4 or 5 inches away from the lathe. And now take a look at the blank. See, it's got kind of a hazy look to it. That's okay though, because it's on the outside of the blank. The inner layers are all sealed. This hazy look is just a rough texture of the surface of the blank where the spritz of the activator hit. When we buff this with micro mesh, it's going to take that out, and this blank is going to shine and be absolutely amazing. I normally finish my pins with pin finishing pads from Penn State, but a lot of people complain because I call them micro mesh pads. Well, recently I bought a set of micro mesh pads, and here they are. Some of the colors are relatively close, so I went ahead and put dots on the end of them so I know what order to use them in. And I've been using these. You can see they've been used more than once. And I'll be honest with you, I almost think I like Penn State's pin finishing pads a little better than I like the micro mesh pads. But we're going to go ahead and use those. I'm going to buff through these 9 pads, and then we're going to come back and show you what this blank looks like. I just finished using the micro mesh pads, and I want you to take a look at the reflection on the top of the blank, just how solid it stays as I rotate the blank. All the blemishes have sanded out. This is going to be a gorgeous blank. That's how I know I have a good finish. I can't see any distortions in that light reflection. As I remove this blank from the lathe, you'll notice that the non-stick bushings actually are stuck. That does happen because I wiped over the blank with the glue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully pop them loose, and then we're going to go over to our sander and we're going to clean the edges of this blank up, and I'll show you that process. If you look at the end of the blank where I popped the non-stick bushings off, there's just a little fingernail of glue. Now I don't want to go and pick that off because I could stand a chance at chipping the end of my blank. I want to make sure I have a nice fit with my pin components. So I bring it back over to my sanding jig, and we're going to start the jig up, and we're just going to rotate this lightly and just ever so lightly kiss the sandpaper. That will clean and square the end of that blank up, and I'll get a beautiful fit with my kit. Fingernail is gone. There's still a little bit of CA or maybe dust inside the tube, but I've got a tool to clean that out, and I'll show that to you. This is a deburring tool. The way it works is you just place it inside your tube, rotate it clockwise a couple of times. What it does is it cleans up and chamfers the inside of the tube, which makes it much easier to start your pin components. And also I find it does a good job of cleaning any CA residue out from the edge of that blank. I'll be using a Sierra kit for this blank, and if I take a quick peek, I have this one little discolored area where the dye didn't take all that well, and I think I'm going to try to assemble it where the clip covers that. Get this locked into place here. Rotate it just a tad. There we go, we'll get her started. And we've got to make sure we're not starting crooked now. Okay, I'm going to stop. Before I press all the way, I'm going to rotate the cap to make sure that I've got the maximum coverage, because I'm ready to press it together, or final press it. Okay, that looks really good. I'm going to bring it up to the camera so you can get a better shot of it, and you can see I've got a gorgeous fit along that trim ring there. Really happy with that. It's just going to be a beautiful pin. I went ahead and put the front half of the pin together. I've shown Sierras quite a few times, so it's not a big deal. I just basically put the spring on the ink refill, dropped it into the nib, and threaded the transmission on. We'll test it. Works perfect. And to final assemble the pin, we press the front half into the back of the pin, and we have got a gorgeous ink pen. Look at that. Like I said, just take a look at see how it changes as you rotate the pen. That's what gives this pen such a beautiful look. I am super happy with how this turned out. I think it's a gorgeous blank. I'd like to thank you for joining me in the shop tonight. This was a really cool pen to make, and the reason why is I had this hybrid blank and I expected to have a pen with a hybrid blank on it. But as I started turning, because of the way I drilled it, all of that stuff turned away, and what it left, it's sort of like peeling back the layers of an onion. It left me with this gorgeous piece of dyed blue cottonwood, stabilized dyed blue cottonwood. Look at the chatoyance in that thing. I mean, I wouldn't change that for the world. It would have been cool as a hybrid blank, but I think it's even better as just a cottonwood, a stabilized cottonwood blank, because you look at it and you move it and it's a different pen. It's so awesome. That blank is incredible. I'd really like to say thank you to Mike DeLawter for putting on this contest. I'll put a link to his channel below. I'd love to say thank you to John Parker for selecting me as a person that he would like to do a pen swap with. I'm going to get this in the mail to Mr. Parker. I look forward to receiving the pen that he turns for me. I will show that to you guys when it arrives. Thank you so much for joining me in the shop today. It's always nice when you get a surprise like this. I had a great time. I want you all to know that you are welcome in my shop anytime. Come back and see me real soon, and have a great evening.